In today's tutorial, I will show you how to use the Develop Pro tool in Aperty. Designed for developing and editing of raw files, this powerful tool will help us to adjust our white balance and also light adjustments on our raw images. Plus, on top of it, we will learn more about histogram and clipping mask. So, if you're ready, we are starting right now. Okay, so starting from the beginning, let's look at the description of the Develop Raw tool. Now, I'm sure that you know that in portrait photography, every exceptional image starts with a solid foundation. And Aperty's Develop Raw tool helps us exactly with that. Designed for photographers, this powerful tool offers precise control for initial development, allowing us to optimize color accuracy, exposure, and tonal range. With features like customizable white balance and powerful light adjustments, we can make sure that our images are ready for further and more creative editing. Now, a quick reminder that the Develop Raw tool is only accessible for raw images. The non-raw images, or the formats like JPEGs, PNGs, and TIFF files, will use the standard Develop tool. If you want to see how to use the standard Develop tool, we already have a tutorial available on our YouTube channel on how to do that, and I will link it in a corner of your screen now. And now finally, it's time to move into the application. We are already in the editing module and we are looking at our sample file. Now, here is a quick reminder that if you want to do the edit on your own computer, all you need to do is to jump into the description of this video, follow the link there, and download the image now. Once you have it ready, import it into the application and we can start. So it's a raw file. You can also see it on the little thumbnail on our image. We have it selected. So let's go ahead and first look at the Develop Raw tool. Now, to find it, we need to navigate into our main editing toolbar and click on the three little sliders, the icon with the three little sliders there. Once we select it, it will open the Essentials tool. Here we have the Develop Raw tool, which is the first tool on the top, and it should be the first tool you start your edit with. But we have some additional tools like curves, color, black and white, sharpen, details, structure, and noise reduction. Now, to access the tool, we just need to click on the little triangle in front of it, or actually even the name of the tool, and this way the tool will open. Now, talking about initial development of a raw file, before we start with the Develop Raw tool and adjusting the white balance, camera profile, and light, I always suggest to take care of the optics. To do that, we need to navigate into the canvas menu, which is highlighted with a little crop icon just above the Essentials tools. So let's do that. Let's click on that. And when we open the canvas tool, you will see that there is an option of crop and optics. So let's click on the optics and activate them. And here we have a number of different options. I often suggest to switch on all the three options on the top. Take care of the distortion, remove chromatic aberration, and depth range. Unless you see something very unnatural on your image, then definitely start with these three checks. Depending on your lens, you may then have to go in manually, adjust the distortion using the slider, or take care of the unwanted vignette using the devignette slider and devignette midpoint. If you're here, you can of course take care of the transformation and adjust the vertical and horizontal position or adjust the aspect. But for this image, we are fine. So focusing just on the corrections, the first three options on the top are those you should have checked on. Once we have that done, we can close the optics, come back to our Essentials tool, and finally focus on the Develop Raw tool. So we have three parts here: camera profile, white balance, and the light section. With the camera profile, when I click on the drop-down box, you will notice that by default, the image is on Aperty default camera profile. Now just quickly a note here about what is camera profile. Well, in photo editing, it is something like a preset that adjusts the color, contrast, and tone of an image based on the characteristics of that specific camera used to capture it. It helps the application, in our case Aperty, to render the colors more accurately. This camera profile is actually quite similar to Adobe Standard, and as you're gonna notice when I hover over Adobe Standard, there is not much difference. Maybe the Adobe Standard is a little bit less saturated and a little bit cooler, but the look is very similar. Now by doing that, you also notice that you can actually see a live preview of the camera profile. As I hover over these profiles, you can see what they're going to do to your image. So there is no need for you to basically click on the profile and see the edit. Simply hover over them, just go quickly through and see what you prefer. Now for me, I will stick with the Aperty default, but it is your personal choice. See what you prefer. Now talking about the additional profiles here. The number and kind of profiles that are going to show here will depend on your RAW file. And of course, the camera you capture the RAW file with. So maybe you will see even longer list, or maybe you will only see Aperty default. Sometimes you also see Aperty default and Adobe Standard. One more time, this depends on the camera you captured the image with and the RAW file. Now you can add custom camera profiles using the Add Custom DCP, or you can add DCP from the DNG images. However, for this tutorial, we're going to be focusing on what's already here. So let's go ahead and select the Aperty default. So we selected our camera profile. And with that being done, it's time to move on to white balance. Here we have a number of controllers. We have the white balance presets drop-down box, where when you click on that, you can choose between the different presets of the white balance. By default, when you open the image, it will be set to as shot. So basically, this is the settings from the camera, the white balance settings. But you can, of course, choose between the daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, and flash. Now, as I was going through the different presets, you noticed that the temperature and tint sliders were changing. So those are a good starting points if the white balance you have had from your RAW file wasn't really good. So you can, for example, go for something like shade, which is way too warm, or tungsten, and use it as a starting point. After that, you can adjust the sliders and basically adjust it to what you like. So these are the presets. After that, the next available tool is the white balance eyedropper. When you click on that, you can then hover over the image and select a reference area for the automatic white balance. Now in professional portrait photography, we often use gray cards, which we can then click on and that will set the white balance perfectly. But we don't have one, so we need to work around. The next best thing to do with the eyedropper is to select something that is close to white. Just like this shirt here. Now, selecting the white, you're looking for midtones. Not too dark, not too bright, just midtones. So let's say somewhere around here. What we're gonna do, we're gonna simply click, and by doing that, the white balance will be adjusted. You can immediately see that it's less warm, and we also remove a little bit of magenta. Let's go back to the white balance tool, where if I go one step back, you can see that we were on 4295 and 7, and after the adjustment, we were on 2966 and 0. But looking at the image, I think for me it's a little bit too cool, and I think a touch of magenta would help. Well, this is where we can use the temperature and tint sliders. With the temperature slider, we can adjust the warmth or coolness of the image. So when we drag it towards the right, we will increase the temperature, and when we drag it towards the left, we will make it cooler. Now talking about the tint, with the tint slider, following the colors on the slider, we can apply and add some magenta and remove the green tint, and the other way around, when we go towards the left, we remove the magenta and apply a little bit of green tint. Now, let's go back, let's just pick one of the presets, let's say the tungsten, or maybe the fluorescent, which work quite nicely, and let's go ahead and just add a little bit of warmth, and again, a little bit of magenta. Looking at it, when we go to the top right corner of the tool and use the eye icon, we can look at the before and after. Before, I think it was a little bit too warm. After, I think it looks a little bit more natural and realistic. So this is the white balance. Presets, eyedrop tool, and the 2 manual adjustments for temperature and tint. Finally, the third part, focusing on light. This is where we can adjust our exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Now, when I'm adjusting the light section, I like to use Histogram for a little overview and guidance. Now, to activate it, we need to right-click on the image and select Show Histogram. By doing that, Histogram will appear on the top of the Essentials tool panel. It may be hidden, so all you need to do is to click on it. The histogram itself has a multiple different modes, and when you click through it, you can basically switch through them. The one we are looking for is the one with luminosity right here. So now we have it here. Looking at it, we kind of have 3 peaks, and we have a quite big space here in the highlights and a little bit in the shadows. So with that being set and visible, we can come back to our light sliders and start with the exposure. The exposure slider very basically allows us to make the image brighter or darker. Now, all these sliders can be easily reset by simply double-clicking on their name. Once we adjust the exposure slider, keep an eye on the histogram. When I go towards right and make the image brighter, the whole histogram shifts towards the right, so it follows the direction of the slider. And the opposite, when I go towards the left and make the image darker, again, the histogram shifts towards the left. Now looking at it, maybe we can add just a little bit of extra exposure to basically balance the position of the histogram, and that's about it. So let's have a look at it, somewhere around 0.2. Moving on to contrast. Contrast in photo editing, basically what it does, it creates contrast by making the areas which are dark, darker, and areas which are bright, brighter. So what we can do, we can take the contrast slider and bring it up, and that will add the contrast, and we can take it down, and that will remove the contrast. So basically balancing the difference between the darker and brighter areas. Now again, let's reset it, and let's have a look at what it does to the histogram. When we increase the contrast, you will notice that the whole histogram is getting flatter. And in general, the gap between the peaks get bigger. So let's have a look. You can see how they get much more spread across the whole histogram. And the opposite, when we go the other way around, you can see how it gets much closer to each other. Now the contrast is pretty much a very individual decision. You can add a lot if you want to, or you can remove it. But for me, I think maybe just somewhere around 15 here will work quite well. Now moving on the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. When I'm adjusting these 4 sliders, I like to look at my clipping mask. Clipping mask is basically going to show us an area that is overexposed and underexposed. Now to see the clipping mask, we can hover over the histogram and click on the little circles in the top right and top left corner. Or you can simply use a J key on your keyboard to switch the clipping mask off and on. Now, before we focus on the clipping mask, let's come back to the light section and talk about the different controllers here. The highlight slider. Well, the highlight slider adjusts the brightness of the brighter parts of your image. By shifting the highlights towards the right, you will make the brighter areas brighter. And by shifting them towards the left, you will make the bright areas darker. After that, we have the shadows. So the shadow slider basically works on the darker parts of your image. So you can make these areas darker, as you can see, or you can make them brighter. You can really open them up. And finally, we have the whites and blacks. With the whites, they basically edit the right part of the histogram, the extreme bright parts of your image. So when we take the whites and shift it towards the right, you will notice how that specific right part of the histogram gets pushed towards that right side. And yes, the image gets much brighter. And the opposite, when we bring them down, you can see how that right part of the histogram gets away from the right border here. So shift them down. And as you can imagine, the blacks does similar thing, but on the other side of the histogram. So you can make the blacks brighter, and again, shift the histogram away from this side of the histogram and also make the dark parts brighter, or you can go the other way around and make the dark areas even darker and shift the histogram towards the left. Now let's reset this. Okay, so coming back to our clipping mask. To do that, I'm gonna just bring the shadow slider down and maybe add a little bit of minus blacks. Now on the image, we have two colors or two overlays. We have a red overlay and blue overlay. The red overlay indicates an area which is overexposed. So if I switch it off, you can see how bright is it there. Overexposed or red area basically indicates an area which has no data there, is pure white, and if you would print the image, this would be just white. Similarly, the blue areas indicates the areas that are underexposed. Again, these areas are completely black. Again, there is no data there, and if you would print the image, it would be completely black. Of course, as you guessed, ideally, we would try to avoid to have both the red and blue overlays on our photos. So how can we do that? Well, we can come back to our light section, and the blue areas are simple. You just need to open up the shadows a little bit, which in this case or in case of this image is quite simple. And you can, of course, as well bring the blacks back to 0 or bring it further. But what about the red area? Well, as I mentioned, it's too bright. And how we adjust the bright areas? With our highlights and whites. So we're gonna go into the highlights, take the slider and start to bring it down. And you can see as I do that, how the area or overexposed area is getting smaller and smaller. And if I go far enough, in this case to -100, it pretty much disappears. So we have taken care of the highlights. We're gonna open the shadows just a little bit. Now with the whites, we can add a little bit, make them a little bit brighter. And with the blacks, yeah, just to add a little bit of contrast, we make them a little darker. And just like that, using the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, we have finished the basic development of the photo. You could, of course, hit J again to switch off the clipping mask. And from here, you would continue with the edit. Now, just a quick note here, you may notice that there is no saturation or vibrance here. And the reason is that they are in the color tool. So let's close the Develop Pro and open the color tool. And here we can adjust the vibrance or saturation. We can also take care of the color cast. And additionally, we can adjust the colors using the HSL panel with the hue shift and the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders, where we can take care of the individual colors using this feature here. So the color, saturation, and vibrance in the color tool and the basic development in the Develop Raw tool. Now, before we going to finish, just a quick reminder that this tutorial is powered by our brand new Professional Portrait LUT bundle. This brand new bundle is focusing on portrait editing, and it will allow you to use the 170 expertly crafted LUTs to quickly and easily adjust your portrait photos. Now, this bundle is of course compatible with the Aperty software, but you can also use it with Luminar Neo, Lightroom Classic, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, DaVinci Code, and so much more. Now, to get the best possible price for the Professional Portrait LUT bundle, simply follow the link in the description of this video. And to find out more about it, head to our website cleverphotographer.com. And that's the end of today's tutorial. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like and share it. And if you have any question about today's topic or about Aperty, then write it in the comment section under this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss on any of our future content focusing on Aperty and Luminar Neo. For today, my name is Jakub and I can't wait to see you in the next video.